The car had barely stopped moving when Rhea saw her. Larissa Vane was standing at the top of the manor steps, one hand resting on Cade's arm, like she had done it 100 times before. Maybe she had. Rhea would not know. Nobody told her these things anymore. The driver opened the door. Rhea did not move. "Ma'am," the driver said, "we're here." She was here. That was the problem. Rhea stepped out into the cold and straightened the dress she had chosen alone, in a room with no one to tell her if the color was right. She had thought, foolishly, that tonight might be different. The Blackthorn Royal Gathering happened once every 2 years. Every pack alpha in the region would be inside that hall tonight, along with their mates, their advisors, and their secrets. It was supposed to be the one night the whole territory pretended to get along. Cade had not told her Larissa was coming. He had not told her much of anything in the last year. Rhea walked up the steps slowly, chin level, because that was the only thing she had left that nobody could take from her. She passed close enough to Cade that their shoulders almost touched. He looked at her the way you look at a stranger's dog, polite, distant, already thinking about something else. "Rhea," he said, "just her name, nothing more." "Cade," she answered, and kept walking. Inside, the hall was already half full. Golden light poured down from 3 enormous chandeliers, catching on wine glasses and jewelry and the sharp edges of 100 careful smiles. Somewhere, a string quartet was playing something slow and pleasant, the kind of music meant to fill silence rather than break it. Rhea had been coming to these gatherings for 2 years, ever since the mating ceremony that made her Cade's wife in name and nothing else. She had learned, over that time, exactly how a room like this worked. She had learned to read the small signs, the way conversation dipped a half-second too long when she entered, the way certain wolves suddenly needed to check their phones, the way nobody quite met her eyes, as if looking at her directly might make the situation more real than anyone wanted it to be. Tonight, the dip in conversation lasted longer than usual. She found her assigned seat at the long table near the front, 3 chairs down from the head of the room, where Cade would sit. Larissa was already settled 2 seats to his left, close enough to be a fixture, far enough to claim she was simply a guest, like anyone else. Rhea sat down, smoothed her napkin over her lap, and reached for the water glass because her hands needed something to hold. A woman across the table gave her a small, careful smile. It was the kind of smile people gave at funerals. "Sorry for your loss. Sorry this is happening in front of everyone. Sorry we are all going to watch, and none of us will say a word." "Rhea." Ivy slid into the seat beside her, close enough that their knees touched under the table. Ivy had been her friend since before the mating, back when Rhea was still just a girl from a small pack with no particular importance, and Cade was still just a name people said with respect rather than fear. Ivy's pack owed nothing to Cade's, which meant Ivy could say things other people could not. "You didn't have to come tonight," Ivy said quietly. "Yes, I did. You could have said you were sick. Everyone would know that was a lie." Ivy glanced toward the head of the table, toward Larissa's dark hair and easy laugh, toward the practiced way she touched Cade's sleeve when she wanted his attention. "Everyone already knows everything," Ivy said. "That's the problem." Rhea did not answer. She was watching the way Cade leaned toward Larissa when she spoke, the way his mouth almost curved into something like warmth. He had not looked at Rhea like that in longer than she could remember without it hurting. 2 years since the mating, 2 years of sharing a house and a title, and almost nothing else. Rhea had told herself, in the beginning, that it would grow into something. Arranged matings sometimes did. She had read about it, heard stories from older wolves who swore that respect could deepen into affection if you gave it enough time and enough patience. She had given it 2 years. It had given her nothing back. A server placed a plate in front of her, something delicate and untouched by hunger. Rhea picked up her fork and put it down again. Across the table, a man she vaguely recognized as an alpha from the Western Territories was watching her with open curiosity, the way people watch a car accident they are too polite to point at directly. "They say the Vane girl arrived an hour before you did," he said, not quite to her, not quite to the table at large. "Seems she likes to make an entrance." Owen, Ivy said sharply. I'm only saying what everyone's thinking. Then don't say it. Owen shrugged and returned to his drink, unbothered, the way men who have never had to sit through an evening like this one always were. Rhea felt heat climb up the back of her neck, not from shame exactly, but from something close to it, a public sort of exposure, as if her private hurt had been printed on a card and set at every table in the room. She reached again for her water glass and found it empty. A server appeared almost instantly to refill it, the kind of quiet attentiveness that came with wealth and power, the same quiet attentiveness that made it impossible to have a single private moment in this house, or any house like it. Cade's voice carried down the table, warm with laughter at something Larissa had said. Rhea did not look up. She did not need to see his face to know the shape of that laugh. She had heard it directed at her exactly twice in 2 years, both times in the earliest months, before he had stopped trying, before Larissa had become a fixture rather than a rumor. The pack had accepted it the way packs accepted most things that involved power. Quietly, without comment, as long as the alpha kept the peace and the borders held, what he did in the privacy of his own house was considered his business, even when his own house included a mate he barely spoke to, and a woman who was not that mate sitting close enough to touch him. Rhea understood the arrangement. She had understood it for a long time. What she had not understood, what still caught in her chest like a stone each time it happened, was why he had never bothered to hide it from her specifically, as if her feelings did not weigh enough to earn even the courtesy of discretion. "You're doing that thing," Ivy said. "What thing?" "That thing where you go somewhere else in your head so you don't have to be here." Rhea managed a small, tired smile. "Is it working?" "No," Ivy said. "You still look like you're about to throw that water glass at someone's head." "I would never waste good water," Ivy laughed despite herself, and for a moment the tightness in Rhea's chest eased a fraction. That was the gift Ivy had always given her, the ability to find something small and human in the middle of a room full of careful performances. It did not fix anything. It made it bearable. The first course was cleared. The quartet shifted into something a little livelier, a signal that the evening was moving from formal greeting into the part where people were expected to mingle, to dance, to pretend that pack politics were simply the backdrop for an ordinary party. Rhea watched Cade rise from his seat, watched him offer his arm to Larissa with the same practiced ease he had once offered it to her, back when the mating was new, and there was still a chance either of them might have tried. They moved toward the dance floor together, and the room, predictably, made space for them without seeming to notice it was doing so. Nobody looked at Rhea, or rather, everyone looked at her without appearing to, the particular skill of people who have spent their whole lives learning how to watch without being caught watching. "Dance with me," Ivy said suddenly, standing and holding out her hand. "Ivy, I am not going to sit here and watch you sit here and watch them. Get up." Rhea let herself be pulled onto the floor, if only because the alternative was staying in her chair with nothing to do but count the ways the evening could get worse. They moved together in the loose, unserious way old friends danced, the kind of dancing that was really just an excuse to stand close and talk without being overheard. "You don't have to stay for the whole thing," Ivy said low, near her ear. "Nobody would blame you for leaving early. Everyone would notice. Everyone's already noticing. At least if you leave, they'll be noticing something you chose to do." It was, Rhea thought, good advice. She filed it away without agreeing to it, the way she filed away most good advice these days, in a drawer marked for later, for a version of herself who might one day be brave enough to use it. Across the floor, Cade turned Larissa in a slow circle, and for one unguarded second, his eyes found Rhea's over Larissa's shoulder. It was not warmth in his expression. It was not even guilt. It was something closer to challenge, as if daring her to make a scene, as if her silence tonight was simply expected, another quiet concession in a long line of them. Rhea held his gaze for exactly as long as it took to make her point, and then looked away first, because giving him nothing was the only power she had left in that particular exchange. The song ended. Ivy squeezed her hand once and released her. Rhea walked back toward the table, past a cluster of alphas discussing border patrols in low, serious voices, past a group of younger wolves laughing at something on someone's phone, past the particular hush that followed her, the way a shadow follows a body on a bright day. She sat down. She picked up her water glass. She did not throw it at anyone, though the temptation, as she had told Ivy, remained a matter of principle rather than desire. The evening had barely begun, and already it felt like something she would need to survive rather than attend. She had no way of knowing yet how much further the night still had to fall, or that the true disruption of the evening had not yet walked through the door. Somewhere beyond the tall windows, a second car was making its way up the long drive, carrying a man whose presence in that hall would change the shape of everything that happened after. Rhea did not know his name yet. She would not forget it after tonight. The doors at the far end of the hall opened, and the room's attention shifted, just slightly, just enough for Rhea to notice it happening. Conversations did not stop. Nobody turned fully to look, but something in the air tightened, the particular alertness that ran through a room full of powerful people when someone dangerous walked in. Rhea glanced up out of simple habit, the same habit that had kept her alive and useful in rooms like this for 2 years. She had no way of knowing that the man crossing the threshold was about to become the second half of everything that would go wrong, and everything that would go right, before this night was finished. For now, she only saw a stranger in dark clothing, moving through the crowd like he owned the ground beneath his feet, and she looked away again, because strangers were not her concern tonight. Her concern was surviving dinner without breaking anything, herself included. The stranger's name was Weston, and within 10 minutes of his arrival, half the room already knew it, the way news traveled through a gathering like this, mouth to mouth, low and fast, more accurate than any announcement. Weston Cray, Alpha of the Northfell Pack. The name landed in the hall like a dropped plate. Rhea had heard the name before, always spoken in the careful, clipped way people used when discussing something dangerous. Northfell and Cade's pack had shared a border and a grudge for longer than Rhea had been alive. Something about a burned grain store, a decade old, that neither side had ever quite let go of. She did not know the details. She only knew that Cade's jaw tightened whenever the name came up, and that tightening had never once relaxed. She watched Cade now, across the hall, and saw exactly that tightening take hold of his face the moment he spotted Weston moving through the crowd. Larissa noticed it too. She placed a hand on Cade's arm, said something low, something meant to soothe. Cade did not look soothed. He looked like a man watching a fuse burn toward something he had spent 10 years trying to forget. Weston, for his part, appeared entirely unbothered by the attention. He moved through the room with the unhurried confidence of someone who had long ago stopped caring whether a room liked him, greeting a few alphas with brief nods, accepting a drink from a passing server, scanning the space with the kind of attention that missed very little. His gaze found Rhea before she was ready for it. She did not know, in that first moment, why his attention settled on her rather than sliding past the way most gazes did. She was not doing anything remarkable. She was sitting alone at a table that had emptied around her, while Ivy went to speak with someone from her own pack, holding a glass of wine she had not touched, wearing the particular stillness of a woman trying very hard to look like she belonged exactly where she was. Weston crossed the room toward her with no hesitation at all, as if the distance between them had already been decided before he ever walked through the door. "You look like the only person here who isn't performing," he said, stopping beside her table. Rhea looked up at him properly for the first time. He was tall, in the particular way that made a room rearrange itself around him without effort, dark-haired, with an expression that suggested he found most of the evening mildly amusing and none of it especially important. His eyes, when they met hers, held none of the careful pity she had grown used to seeing from everyone else in this hall tonight. "That's a strange thing to say to someone you've never met," she said. "Is it wrong, though?" She considered lying. She decided against it. "No," she admitted. "It isn't wrong." Weston, he did not offer his hand. He simply said the name, the way a man says something he assumes you already know, and waited to see what she would do with it. "I know who you are," Rhea said. "Then you also know I'm not supposed to be talking to you. You could stop." "I could," he agreed, and did not move. There was something reckless in standing there with him, something that prickled at the back of her neck, with awareness of every eye that might be watching, every version of the story that would be told about this exact moment before the night was finished. She knew, distantly, that this was a bad idea. The kind of bad idea that came with consequences neither of them would fully control once it started. She found, in that moment, that she did not particularly care. 2 years of being invisible in her own marriage had worn away at something in her, some instinct for self-protection that should have made her stand up, excuse herself, walk away before this went any further. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was and let herself feel, for the first time in longer than she could remember, like she was the one being seen rather than looked past. "You're going to get us both in trouble," she said. "Probably," Weston said. "Does that bother you?" She thought about Cade laughing at Larissa's joke on the dance floor an hour ago. She thought about the small, funeral careful smile the woman across the table had given her when she sat down. She thought about every quiet concession she had made over 2 years in the name of keeping the peace, in the name of being the kind of mate nobody could criticize. "Not as much as it should," she said. Something shifted in Weston's expression, not quite a smile, something closer to recognition, as if she had just confirmed something he'd already guessed. "Dance with me," he said. "That would be a very public mistake. Most interesting things are." Rhea looked past him, toward the dance floor, toward the cluster of alphas near the head table who had already noticed Weston standing at her side for longer than politeness required. She looked toward Cade, who was watching now, his attention pulled entirely away from Larissa for the first time all evening, his expression unreadable, in a way that told her he was working very hard to keep it that way. She stood up. "One dance," she said. "I'll take it." He offered his hand. She took it, and the room, which had been pretending not to watch her all evening, stopped pretending entirely. They moved onto the floor together, as the quartet shifted into something slower, something with more room in it for the kind of dancing that required actual closeness rather than polite distance. Weston held her the way a man holds something he intends to keep steady rather than something he intends to control, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers loosely enough that she could have stepped back at any point, and he would have let her go without protest. She did not step back. "You dance like someone who's had a great deal of practice not caring what people think," she said. "I gave that up a long time ago. It's remarkably freeing. I've heard. You could try it sometime." "I'm trying it right now," Rhea said, and something in her chest loosened as she said it, the particular relief of admitting a thing out loud rather than carrying it silently. Across the floor, she could feel Cade's attention on them like a physical weight, though she refused to look directly at him and confirm it. She did not need to see his face to know the particular expression it would be wearing. Fury, probably, or something colder and more calculating, the look of a man recalculating a situation that had suddenly become more complicated than he expected. "Your husband is watching us," Weston said, without turning his head to check. "I know. Does that concern you?" "He watched another woman touch his arm for the better part of an hour tonight," Rhea said. "I think we can both survive one dance." Weston's mouth curved, not quite a full smile, but close enough. "Fair point." The song moved through its slow verses, and for 3 minutes, Rhea allowed herself something she had not allowed herself in longer than she could remember. The simple, uncomplicated pleasure of being paid attention to by someone who seemed genuinely interested in what she said rather than simply enduring her presence. It was a small thing. It should not have felt as significant as it did, but 2 years of quiet neglect had lowered the bar for what felt like warmth, and Weston's attention, however dangerous, however temporary, felt like standing near a fire after a long time in the cold. "Why are you really here tonight?" she asked, partly to distract herself from how good his hand felt at her waist, partly because she genuinely wanted to know. Northfell and Cade's pack did not attend the same gatherings by accident. Weston's presence here was, by every account she'd heard, a provocation in itself. "I was invited," he said simply. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I'm giving you tonight." "Mysterious," Rhea said. "How original." Weston laughed, low and genuine, and the sound of it drew a few more eyes toward them, though Rhea found she minded that considerably less than she should have. "You're sharper than I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "Honestly, I expected someone smaller, quieter. I've heard things about the Alpha's mate. All of it wrong, I'm sure." "Most of it," Weston agreed. "Not all." The song ended before she could ask him what parts of the rumors he considered accurate, and the moment the music stopped, the spell of the last 3 minutes broke along with it. Rhea became abruptly, uncomfortably aware of exactly how many people had been watching them, of the particular silence that had settled over the section of the room nearest the dance floor, of Cade's expression when she finally allowed herself to look at him directly. He was not looking at her with fury. He was looking at her the way you look at something you thought you understood completely, only to discover you had been wrong the entire time. "Thank you for the dance," Weston said, stepping back and releasing her hand with the same careful ease he'd used to take it in the first place. "Thank you for the distraction," Rhea said. "Any time." He walked away without another word, back toward the cluster of alphas near the far wall, leaving Rhea standing alone on the dance floor with every eye in the room finding some reason to look anywhere but directly at her, the particular courtesy of people who have just witnessed something they intend to discuss extensively the moment she is out of earshot. She walked back to her table with her chin level and her hands steady, though her heart was doing something complicated and unfamiliar in her chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope, though hope for what, exactly, she could not yet say. Ivy met her halfway, eyes wide. "What," Ivy said, "was that?" "A dance." "That was not just a dance, Rhea. That was Weston Cray. Do you understand who that is? Do you understand what Cade is going to—" "I understand exactly what I did," Rhea said, and found, to her own surprise, that she meant it. Across the room, she could feel Cade's attention still fixed on her, sharp and unwavering in a way it had not been in longer than she could remember. Larissa stood beside him, saying something Rhea could not hear, her hand tightening on his sleeve in a way that suggested she, too, had noticed the shift in the room's attention, and did not like what it meant. For the first time all evening, Rhea did not feel invisible. She was not entirely certain that was a good thing, but she found, as she sat back down and finally reached for the wine she had left untouched all night, that she did not particularly regret it either. The evening was far from over, and somewhere in the tightening line of Cade's jaw, Rhea could see the shape of everything that was still coming. By the time the second course arrived, the story had already traveled the length of the hall 3 times over, growing a little with each telling, the way stories always did in a room full of people with nothing more urgent to occupy them. Rhea did not need to hear the whispers directly to know what they said. She could read it in the glances that lingered a beat too long, in the way certain wolves leaned close to their neighbors with their hands half covering their mouths, in the particular hush that fell over a table the moment she walked past it. The Alpha's mate danced with his enemy. She could imagine the shape the story would take by morning, embellished and reshaped with each new mouth that carried it. By tomorrow, it would not simply be a dance. It would be a scandal, a betrayal, proof of something ugly that everyone had apparently suspected all along and simply been too polite to say out loud until now. She caught sight of Larissa near the drinks table, deep in conversation with 2 women Rhea vaguely recognized from Cade's inner circle. Larissa's face was arranged into careful sympathy, the particular expression of someone enjoying a piece of gossip while performing concern about it. "Always seemed a bit desperate if you ask me," Rhea heard, as she passed close enough to catch the tail end of the sentence. She did not turn to see who had said it. She did not need to. The words followed her anyway, the way unkind words always did, finding their target no matter how quickly she walked. She found Ivy near the terrace doors, arms crossed, watching the room with the particular wariness of someone bracing for a storm they could see building on the horizon, but could do nothing to stop. "You need to leave," Ivy said, the moment Rhea reached her. "Now, before this gets worse. Leaving now would look like running. Staying is going to look like something else entirely, and you know it." Rhea did know it. She had known it the moment she stood up from her chair and put her hand in Weston's, had understood exactly what she was choosing, and exactly what it would cost. She had chosen it anyway, and she was not, even now, prepared to regret it, whatever the room decided to make of it. "Where is Cade?" she asked. Ivy's expression tightened. "He asked to speak with you. Privately. He's in the East Corridor." Of course he was. A private conversation, away from the eyes that had watched the dance, away from the ears that were already spreading the story, faster than either of them could contain it. Rhea felt something settle in her chest, not fear exactly, but a kind of resigned readiness, the sensation of a person walking toward a conversation she had known was coming since the moment the music started. "I'll go," she said. "Rhea, it's fine, Ivy. I can handle him." She was not entirely certain that was true, but she said it anyway, because saying it out loud sometimes made a thing more possible than it would otherwise have been, and she needed, just then, to believe she had some measure of control over what happened next. The East Corridor was quieter than the hall, the noise of the gathering fading into a low murmur behind heavy doors as she walked. Cade was waiting near a tall window at the far end, hands in his pockets, his back to her, the set of his shoulders telling her everything his silence had not yet said. "You wanted to speak with me," Rhea said, stopping a few feet away. He turned. Whatever expression he'd been wearing in the hall, watching her dance with Weston from across the room, had sharpened now into something closer to genuine anger, the kind she had not seen directed at her in longer than she could remember. It was almost a relief, seeing it. At least anger meant he was paying attention. "You did that on purpose," he said. "I danced with a man who asked me to dance. You danced with Weston Cray, in front of every alpha in the territory. You know exactly what that man is to me." "I know what you've told me, which is very little," Rhea said. "You've never once explained the history between you and Northfell. I only know it involves a grain store and a decade of silence. If you wanted me to understand the weight of what I was doing, perhaps you should have trusted me with the reason for it at some point in the last 2 years." That landed somewhere. She saw it, a small flicker of something behind his anger, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "That's not the point," he said. "Then what is the point, Cade? That I embarrassed you, that I made you look foolish in front of your peers?" Her voice had begun to shake, not from fear, but from something that had been building in her for 2 years, and had finally found an opening large enough to escape through. "Because I have spent 2 years watching you embarrass me in exactly that way, over and over, and I never once made a scene about it. I sat quietly at every dinner. I smiled at every gathering. I let Larissa Vane sit at your table and touch your arm and laugh at your jokes, and I never said a single word, because I understood that was the arrangement, whatever it cost me. But you don't get to be furious with me for one dance when you have spent 2 years giving me nothing but silence and someone else's company." Cade's jaw worked, and for a long moment he said nothing at all, the anger in his face shifting into something more complicated, something closer to being caught out than being wronged. "It isn't that simple," he said finally. "Then make it simple for me. Explain it." "I can't. Can't or won't." He did not answer. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything neither of them had said in 2 years of careful, polite distance, and Rhea felt, watching his face, that she was closer in that moment to understanding him than she had been in the entire length of their marriage, and still no closer at all to actually knowing him. "Weston Cray is not a man you should trust," Cade said finally, choosing, as he always did, to redirect rather than explain. "Whatever he said to you tonight, whatever he made you feel, I promise you it was calculated. He does nothing without a reason." "Perhaps," Rhea said, "but at least he looked at me like I was in the room. That's more than I can say for you most days." She turned to leave before he could answer, because she did not trust herself to stay and hear whatever he might say next, whether it would be an apology she did not believe or an accusation she did not deserve. She made it 3 steps toward the door before his voice stopped her. "Rhea." She paused, but did not turn around. "This isn't over," he said. "Not the conversation. Not tonight." "I didn't imagine it would be," she said, and walked back toward the hall, leaving him standing alone by the window with whatever thoughts he was too proud or too frightened to say out loud. She returned to find the gathering had shifted while she was gone, the easy chatter of before replaced with something more charged, more watchful. She caught sight of Weston near the far wall, deep in conversation with a man she did not recognize, though his eyes lifted to find hers the moment she re-entered the room, as if he had been listening for the sound of the door the entire time she was gone. He did not approach her again. Not yet. But something passed between them across the width of the hall, an acknowledgement of what had already been set in motion, and Rhea understood, with a clarity that frightened her slightly, that the dance had not been the end of anything. It had been the beginning. Larissa found her near the drinks table 20 minutes later, her expression arranged into something that might have passed, to an untrained eye, as friendly concern. "That was quite a display," Larissa said, pouring herself a glass of wine with unhurried precision. "I do hope you know what you're doing. I'm not sure that's your concern." "Everything that happens to Cade is my concern," Larissa said, and there was something underneath the words, something almost like a warning, though her tone remained perfectly pleasant. "You should be careful, Rhea. Men like Weston Cray don't do anything without a purpose. If I were you, I'd ask myself what he actually wants, before I let myself enjoy the attention too much." "Is that concern?" Rhea asked. "Or jealousy?" Larissa's smile did not falter, though something behind her eyes went very still. "Neither," she said. "Just advice, freely given. Take it or don't." She walked away before Rhea could respond, leaving her standing alone with a full glass of wine and the uncomfortable sense that, for the first time all evening, Larissa had said something worth actually considering. What did Weston want? Rhea had been so caught up in the simple pleasure of being seen, of feeling, for 3 minutes, like she mattered to someone in that room, that she had not once stopped to ask herself what a man like Weston Cray could possibly gain from dancing with the mate of his oldest enemy in front of every alpha in the territory. It was not a small risk for him either. Whatever history existed between Northfell and Cade's pack, whatever grievance had kept the 2 alphas from speaking civilly for a decade, Weston had walked directly into the heart of enemy territory and made a public gesture that could only complicate things further. Men did not take risks like that without a reason. She found herself scanning the room for him again, and found him near the terrace doors, watching her with an expression she could not quite read, patient and considering, like a man waiting for something he was confident would eventually arrive. She did not go to him, not yet, but she held his gaze a moment longer than was strictly wise, and felt something settle between them that had nothing to do with the dance, and everything to do with whatever came next. The evening had several hours left to run, and Rhea understood, standing there with her wine going warm in her hand, that whatever storm she had started on that dance floor was only just beginning to gather its full strength. Somewhere behind her, she heard Cade's voice again, low and controlled, speaking with one of his advisors near the head table. She did not turn to listen. She had said everything she needed to say to him for one night, and she found, to her own surprise, that she did not regret a single word of it. The rest of the gathering would have to survive without her full attention, because for the first time in 2 years, Rhea's mind was fully occupied with a question that had nothing to do with her husband at all. What did Weston Cray actually want from her? She would not have to wait long to begin finding out. The answer came from a place Rhea did not expect, and from a woman she trusted far less than she should have. Nora Cray found her near the library doors, sometime after midnight, when the gathering had thinned enough that quiet conversations were finally possible without an audience. Rhea recognized her instantly by the resemblance. The same dark hair as her brother, the same unhurried way of moving through a room like she had already decided how the conversation would end before it began. "You're the one who danced with my brother," Nora said, not quite a question. "I am." I wanted to see what all the fuss was about. Nora studied her for a long moment, the kind of assessment that made Rhea feel like a puzzle being turned over in someone's hands. "You're not what I expected. People keep telling me that tonight. It's not an insult. I mean it as a compliment, actually. Weston doesn't take interest in ordinary people. Whatever he saw in you, it wasn't nothing." Rhea felt something cautious rise in her chest, the sense that she was standing at the edge of information she had wanted all evening and was not entirely certain she was prepared to hear. "Then tell me what he saw," she said. "Tell me why a man who has spent a decade at odds with my husband would risk starting a war over a single dance." Nora's expression shifted, something almost like sympathy crossing her face, though it did not entirely erase the sharper thing underneath it. "You really don't know," she said, "about Marion." The name meant nothing to Rhea. She said as much, and watched Nora's expression shift again, this time into something closer to disbelief. "He never told you," Nora said. "Of course he didn't. Cade doesn't tell anyone anything he doesn't have to." She glanced around the corridor, checking, Rhea realized, that no one else was close enough to overhear. Marion was a healer from a small pack near the coast. Before you, before Larissa even. Cade loved her the way people love exactly once in their lives, the kind of love that ruins them a little for everything that comes after. Rhea felt something cold settle in her stomach, the particular dread of learning a truth she had never been given the chance to prepare for. "What happened to her?" "She died," Nora said simply. 9 years ago. A border skirmish that never should have happened, between Cade's pack and mine. The official story is that it was an accident, a misunderstanding between patrols that got out of hand. The truth is a great deal messier than that, and depending on who you ask, the blame sits in a different place every time. And the grain store? A symptom, not a cause. Cade burned it in retaliation, convinced my brother had ordered the attack that killed her. Weston has spent 9 years insisting he had nothing to do with it, that the patrol acted without orders, that Cade destroyed something that mattered to my family out of grief, dressed up as justice. Neither of them has ever been willing to let it go, because letting it go would mean admitting the other man might have been telling the truth. Rhea absorbed this slowly, feeling the shape of her marriage rearrange itself around a piece of information she had never been given. 2 years of quiet distance, of careful politeness that never deepened into anything real, and she had assumed the reason was simply indifference, simply the natural cooling of an arrangement neither of them had chosen. She had never once considered that Cade might be carrying grief for a woman he had loved and lost, long before Rhea ever existed in his life. "Why didn't he tell me?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew part of the answer. "Would you have wanted to hear it?" Nora asked. "That your husband loved someone else first, loved her enough that her death still shapes every decision he makes nearly a decade later. Some men would rather let a woman think they simply don't care than admit the truth is so much worse. Indifference is easier to bear than grief you can't compete with." Rhea thought of Larissa then, of the easy way she occupied space at Cade's side, and wondered, with a sudden discomfort, whether Larissa knew about Marion, whether that knowledge was part of whatever hold she had over him. She wondered if Larissa had simply been convenient, a woman who asked for nothing real and offered nothing real in return, the safest possible arrangement for a man too wounded to risk actual intimacy again. "And Weston," she asked, "where does he fit into all of this?" Nora's expression softened slightly, something almost fond crossing her face. "Marion was engaged to my brother before she ever met Cade," she said. "They grew up together. Everyone assumed they would mate eventually, until she met Cade at a gathering much like this one, and everything changed. Weston never got over it, not entirely. Not the loss of her to Cade, and certainly not the loss of her to death a few years later, in a conflict that grew directly out of the rivalry her choice had created between them. So tonight," Rhea said slowly, "when he danced with me. I don't know what tonight was," Nora admitted. That part, you'll have to ask him yourself. But I don't think it was only about Cade. I think, whatever he saw in you, it surprised him. My brother does not surprise easily anymore. Rhea stood in the quiet corridor for a long moment after Nora walked away, turning the new information over in her mind, trying to fit it against everything she thought she understood about her marriage, and finding that almost none of it matched. 2 years of silence that she had read as indifference now looked, from this new angle, like something closer to a wound that had never properly healed, one Cade had been too proud or too frightened to let anyone see. It did not excuse him. She was careful with herself on that point, refusing to let sympathy slide into forgiveness for things that had genuinely hurt her. Understanding why a man behaved a certain way did not obligate her to accept the behavior itself. But it did shift something in her chest, some of the sharper edges of her anger softening into something more complicated, grief layered over grief, two people who had spent 2 years hurting each other without either of them fully understanding why. She found Ivy near the coat room sometime later, already gathering her things, ready to leave the moment Rhea gave the word. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Ivy said. "In a manner of speaking," Rhea said. "I think I finally understand my own marriage. 9 years too late." She told Ivy everything Nora had shared, watching her friend's expression shift through surprise and sympathy and, finally, something like careful anger on Rhea's behalf. "That doesn't make what he's done to you acceptable," Ivy said firmly, once Rhea had finished. "Grief is not an excuse for cruelty, even quiet cruelty." "I know," Rhea said. "I'm not excusing it, I'm only starting to understand it. There's a difference." "There is," Rhea agreed. "I'm just not sure yet what to do with either one." She thought of Cade standing by the window in the east corridor, the flicker of something behind his anger when she'd accused him of giving her nothing but silence. She wondered now if some of that silence had never been about her at all, if she had simply been standing in the blast radius of a wound inflicted by someone else entirely, years before she ever arrived in his life. She thought of Weston, of the ease with which he'd claimed her attention on the dance floor, and wondered how much of that ease had been genuine interest, and how much had been the echo of an old loss finally finding a shape he recognized. A woman standing in the same kind of quiet neglect Marion might have recognized, had she lived long enough to see it. None of it was simple, none of it offered her a clean answer about what to do next, whether to forgive Cade for a decade of grief he'd never explained, or to lean into whatever Weston seemed to be offering, or to walk away from both of them entirely and finally choose herself for the first time in 2 years. The gathering would end soon. The gossip would follow her home regardless of what she decided. But for the first time since she had stepped out of the car at the start of the evening, Rhea felt she finally understood the true shape of the room she had been standing in all along, and understanding it, even painfully, felt like the first real step toward deciding what to do about it. Somewhere in the hall behind her she could hear voices rising, sharper than the polite murmur of before, and she recognized, with a sinking feeling, the particular tone of a confrontation building toward something that could not be undone once it started. She turned back toward the sound, because whatever was happening, she suspected she was about to be at the center of it. The voices belonged to Cade and Weston, and by the time Rhea reached the main hall, the two of them were standing close enough to each other that every conversation around them had died completely. The entire gathering pulled into a tight, silent circle around the two alphas, like moths, drawn to something about to catch fire. "You had no right," Cade was saying, his voice low and controlled in the way that frightened people more than shouting ever could. "Whatever you think you were doing tonight, you had no right to involve her." "I involved no one who didn't want to be involved," Weston said, unbothered, though there was something sharper beneath his calm now, something that had not been present earlier in the evening. Perhaps ask yourself why she was so willing to be involved in the first place. Cade's hands curled into fists at his sides. Rhea had seen him angry before, in the small, contained way he allowed himself in private, but she had never seen this particular version of it, something older and rawer bleeding through the careful control he usually wore like armor. This isn't about her, Cade said. This is about you, using her, the way you use everything, to get at me. Is it? Weston tilted his head slightly, something almost curious in his expression. Or is it that you can't stand watching someone else give her the attention you stopped giving her a long time ago? The words landed like a struck match. Rhea watched the color drain from Cade's face, watched fury replace it almost instantly, and understood, in that moment, that whatever fragile control either man had been holding on to was about to break entirely. Enough, Rhea said, stepping forward before she had fully decided to. Both men turned toward her, and the rest of the hall turned with them, every eye in the room suddenly and inescapably fixed on the three of them, standing at the center of a circle that had formed without anyone officially calling for one. This is not a conversation you get to have about me, as though I'm not standing here, Rhea said, her voice steadier than she felt. If either of you have something to say it to me directly. Cade's jaw tightened. Rhea, this doesn't concern. It concerns me entirely, she said. I am the one you're both fighting over as though I'm a piece of territory to be claimed, rather than a person with a say in the matter. So say what you actually mean, or stop talking about me as though I'm not capable of hearing it myself. Silence followed, thick and uncomfortable, the kind that made every wolf in the room lean imperceptibly closer, unwilling to miss whatever came next. Cade spoke first, and when he did, his voice had lost some of its earlier sharpness, replaced by something more uncertain, more exposed than she had heard from him in longer than she could remember. I know I haven't been the husband you deserved, he said. I know that. I've known it for longer than I've been willing to admit, even to myself. Then why? Rhea asked, and the question came out smaller than she intended. All the careful control she'd been holding on to for 2 years, suddenly harder to maintain in front of an entire hall of witnesses. Because it was easier, Cade said quietly. Because loving you the way I should have would have meant letting go of something I wasn't ready to let go of. And I let that unwillingness cost you 2 years of a marriage that should have given you more than silence. Weston made a small sound, something between a scoff and disbelief, though he said nothing further, watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. Marion, Rhea said, and watched Cade flinch at the name, watched something in his face crack open entirely. You know, he said, it was not a question. I know now, 9 years too late, but I know. She held his gaze steadily, refusing to look away even as her own composure threatened to fracture along with his. You should have told me, not to excuse what you did, but because I deserve to understand the shape of the marriage I was actually standing inside of, rather than assuming I simply wasn't enough to earn your attention. You were never the problem, Cade said. I want you to understand that, whatever happens after tonight. You were never the reason things went cold between us. Then Larissa was simply convenient, Rhea said. A woman who asked nothing real of you because you had nothing real left to give her, or me, or anyone. Cade did not deny it. His silence was answer enough. Weston stepped forward slightly, drawing Rhea's attention back toward him, and something in his expression had shifted too, the earlier ease replaced by something more careful, more genuinely uncertain than she had seen from him all evening. I won't pretend my reasons for tonight were entirely uncomplicated either, he said, addressing her directly now, ignoring Cade entirely. Some part of what drew me to you was old business I've been carrying for 9 years, a grief I never fully let go of, and I think, if I'm honest, some part of me saw an echo of it in you tonight. That isn't fair to you, and I understand if it changes how you see what happened between us on that dance floor. Rhea absorbed this, feeling something in her chest settle into a strange, clarifying stillness. 2 men, both carrying grief and history she had known nothing about until an hour ago, both drawn toward her tonight for reasons that had almost nothing to do with who she actually was, and almost everything to do with wounds neither of them had properly healed. I think, she said slowly, that both of you have spent tonight fighting over which of you gets to use me as a way of settling something that has nothing to do with me at all. Neither man spoke. I am not a piece of unfinished business, Rhea continued, her voice growing steadier with every word. I am not a stand-in for a woman. Either of you lost 9 years ago, and I am not a prize to be claimed in whatever war the two of you have been fighting since before I ever arrived in either of your lives. If either of you actually wants something real with me, it will have to start with seeing me clearly, not as an echo of Marion, and not as a means of hurting each other. The hall remained utterly silent, every wolf present holding their breath for whatever would happen next, and Rhea felt, standing at the center of that silence, a strange and unfamiliar sense of power settling over her, the particular strength that comes from finally saying, out loud, in front of witnesses, exactly what you need people to understand. Cade, she said, turning to face him fully, you have spent 2 years giving me almost nothing, and tonight, you finally told me why. I appreciate the honesty, even this late, but honesty after the damage is done does not undo the damage itself. I know, he said quietly. I need time, Rhea continued, time to decide whether there is anything left in this marriage worth rebuilding, or whether we have both simply been going through the motions of something that ended long before either of us admitted it out loud. She turned to Weston next, whose expression had grown carefully neutral, bracing, she suspected, for whatever she might say to him as well. And you, she said, I don't yet know what tonight was, for either of us, whether it was genuine interest or simply old grief finding a familiar shape to attach itself to. I would like to find out honestly, without either of us using the other to settle a decade-old war, but that will require patience, and it will require you being as honest with yourself as I've asked Cade to be with me. Weston inclined his head slightly, something that might have been respect crossing his features. That seems fair, he said. Rhea looked around the hall then, at the sea of faces that had watched her entire private life unfold in public over the course of a single evening, and found that she no longer felt the particular shame she had carried into this gathering hours earlier. She had spent 2 years being talked about, pitied, watched with careful sympathy by people who assumed she would simply endure whatever her marriage handed her without complaint. Tonight, she had stopped enduring quietly. This gathering, she said, addressing the room at large, her voice carrying clearly across the silence, was meant to be an evening of peace between packs who have spent too long carrying old grievances. I would ask that whatever any of you choose to say about tonight, you remember that peace requires honesty first, and none of us in this hall, myself included, have been especially honest with each other for a very long time. She did not wait for a response. She turned, gathered the remaining pieces of her composure, and walked toward the doors at the far end of the hall, past Ivy, who fell into step beside her without a word, past clusters of wolves who parted to let her through with an entirely different kind of attention than they had given her at the start of the evening. Behind her, she did not know what passed between Cade and Weston, whether the old grudge would finally find some path toward resolution, or whether it would simply continue simmering beneath the surface as it had for 9 years already. She found, walking out into the cold night air, that she did not need to know tonight. Some things could wait until morning, until she had slept, until she had given herself the space to decide what she actually wanted, rather than reacting to whatever the evening had thrown at her. You did that, Ivy said quietly, once they were outside, better than I have ever seen anyone do anything in that hall. I don't feel like I did anything well, Rhea admitted. I feel like I finally stopped pretending everything was fine. That is doing something well, Ivy said. That's doing the hardest thing there is. They stood together in the cold for a long moment, looking back at the manor, its windows glowing gold against the dark, the gathering continuing on without them, the story of tonight already spreading further than either of them could control or take back. Rhea did not know yet what the following weeks would hold, whether she would find her way back to something real with Cade, whether Weston's interest would prove to be genuine or simply another echo of old grief dressed up as new possibility, whether the packs themselves would use tonight's confrontation as an excuse for finally settling 9 years of unresolved anger, for better or for worse. What she did know, standing there in the cold with her oldest friend beside her, and the manor glowing behind them like the last act of a play she had not fully chosen, but had certainly helped to write, was that she was done being a quiet feature of someone else's story. Whatever came next, she intended to choose it herself. The car arrived a few minutes later, and Rhea climbed inside without looking back at the hall, without waiting to see whether Cade or Weston or anyone else would follow her out into the night. She had said everything she needed to say. The rest of the story, whatever shape it eventually took, belonged to a version of herself who was finally ready to write it on her own terms. Behind her, the gathering continued, and the gossip continued with it, and somewhere in that golden light, two men stood facing each other, with 9 years of grief finally spoken aloud between them, though neither Rhea nor anyone else in that hall could yet say what either of them would choose to do with it. For the first time in 2 years, that uncertainty did not frighten her. It simply felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, entirely her own.